Middle. Hello, hello, hello. If we can all get a seat, we can get the program started, almost get back on track. But, you know, today is, we've done forums in Sioux City, Iowa, Nevada, back in Wisconsin, and every time we do, we have a youth forum. And to me, it's one of the best parts of any program we have, when we have the youth up there telling us what they know and what we should think. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Skirtash, good day. It's good to be among friends, but it's also good to be among Hajin here in the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. My name is Greg Mendoza, and I work for Unity as its Youth Programs Director. So I'm really honored to be asked to be here to moderate this panel. And it's really important, particularly to our Native young people. So I am just truly grateful. Just a little history about me. I come from the Gila River Indian community. I'm of the Akhenaten, Tohono, and Yaqui tribes. I've served as the former past governor of the Gila River Indian community, along with being a councilman and the chief of staff of my tribe. So my life has come full circle because I started in youth development, and now I'm back to working with youth, but at a different level, at the national level. And I love the work that I do, so I have opportunity to work with youth, Native youth throughout the country. So again, we want to welcome you on behalf of the Four Directions, Native Vote, and the Phoenix Indian Center. We want to thank you for joining us this afternoon for Securing the Future. Young voters leading the way. Empowering Native voters in election is a very powerful concept that focuses on increasing voter participation, representation, advocacy among our Native communities. It involves ensuring that Native votes are heard and considered in our tribal, state, and national elections. This can be achieved through various strategies, and that's why we're here today and the next couple of days here at this forum to talk about those strategies. When we talk about strategies, we're talking about voter education, registration drives, community involvement and advocacy, creating cultural relevant campaigns, and encouraging Indigenous candidates to run for office. But today I have the honor of introducing these wonderful young ladies on stage. Our first young lady, her name is Aiden Clytus, and she's Navajo. She is the communications specialist for the Phoenix Indian Center, a graduate of Arizona State University with a bachelor's degree in justice studies and a minor in American Indian Studies. She worked with Senator Mark Kelly as a Utah congressional intern this past summer. She has done grassroots organizing and lobbying around For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. She is a former Native American management intern with the town of Gilbert, Native Organizers Alliance fellow with Moccasins on the Ground, Native Voter Initiative for the 2024 general election. Thank you, Aiden, for being with us today. Our next panelist is Jalen Harvey. She is Navajo. She's of the Pueblo of Acoma and Hopi. She's a sophomore at the University of Arizona, double majoring in public affairs with an emphasis in public administration and management. And she's a double major, but also in American Indian Studies, while minoring in pre-law. This is a busy young lady. She serves as the secretary and the Western Area Representative for the National Unity Council Executive Committee, overseeing tribal youth councils in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. Jalen's leadership began with the Future Inspired Native American Leaders Youth Council at the Phoenix Indian Center, where she held many leadership positions from 2019 to 2023. At U of A on campus, Jaden is the Director of Business and Administration for the Residential Hall Association. She is an advocate for cultural preservation and Indigenous youth opportunities and is a role model in balancing modern city life with traditional practices while pursuing youth involvement in tribal and local governments. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Jalen Harvey. Our next panelist is Sistine Lewis. She's an Aunt Autumn from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. She has held many titles, which include Junior Miss Salt River, and she was crowned as the 61st Miss Indian Arizona. She graduated with honors from Scottsdale Community College with an associate degree. She's currently a junior at Arizona State University, majoring in criminology and criminal justice. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. So again, it's my honor to be here and to be among these awesome young ladies as we talk about securing the future. And I'm going to pose questions to them. And again, we have 6 different sets of topic areas where I'm going to address questions to them. Those topic areas include the importance of voting and civic engagement. Another is role of Native youth in shaping policy, leadership and representation. Another area is building voter power in our Native communities. And another is overcoming historical challenges when it comes to voting. And then our last topic area is in youth and long-term vision. So with that, I'm going to ask my first question to Aiden. How can Native youth overcome barriers to voting, such as voter ID laws, polling, access, and gerrymandering in Indigenous communities?
Well, thank you for that question. For youth to overcome some of these voting barriers, there's a lot of, it's difficult to get by, but I know there's initiatives now being active in elections and being civically engaged. That's the opportunity for the community or youth to voice what issues they are coming across. I know I can speak for Arizona, but I can't speak for all tribal communities, but there are initiatives to ensure that tribal IDs are acceptable at the polls. As sovereign nations, entities within the United States, those are valid IDs of your citizenship. So working to secure that is an important thing. I know that voting early, it's really important to, if you aren't able to make it out on election day, to sign up for early voting or mail-in voting ballots for youth. It's also important to communicate to our youth that they are eligible to vote, even if they aren't 18 currently, as long as they're 18 before November 5th, that's an important time to get involved with the, or get registered before that. So, making sure that youth are aware of that. And then also bringing them to the conversation. I will say that I feel like my generation's been left behind a little bit as far as politics, as far as civic engagement. We haven't really been brought to the table fully, and this panel is an example of remedying that. But I think that we need to have those conversations more and know that these are our future leaders and be able to connect the dots for them. We can't just say voting is important, but why? Bring them into these conversations and be actively involved. One of the ways our organization, the Phoenix Indian Center, is working to do that is through our Final Youth Council. It's a really great opportunity to see the ins and outs of even just organizing for your community, because civic engagement, voting is involved with that too, who you have to work with, the mayor's office, all these different entities. So again, I will say that, just like bring us to the conversation, vote early. Let me see, when does early voting start? Anyways, register by October 7th. I'll say that. Even if you're not 18 by October 7th, as long as you're 18 by November 5th, just get your family out there and bring us to the table. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, my question to Jalen. What are some misconceptions about voting that may deter Native young voters? And how can we address them?
Thank you for that question. So first off, I think a lot of misconceptions. This year, this is my first time voting, so there's a lot to learn, and it's a very complicated election process this year. So, doing a lot of research and everything, but I think a big thing misconception-wise is a lot of you tend to feel that their vote doesn't count. And with that, you really have to encourage them that their vote does count. Their one vote can make a huge difference in the election. And that's why we advocate that every vote makes change. And I think that's a big misconception that, just one vote won't do anything, but in reality it really can. And I think another misconception is that there's only two parties, but there's also a third party that's really not mentioned a lot. And I think that's a big misconception that you can only vote for the two big parties that are advocating a lot more. So I think those are two very big misconceptions that youth are really facing, especially for first-time voters. It's a lot more complicated, when you don't know how to vote or, where do I register and everything. So I think it just comes down to those variety of misconceptions that Indigenous voters and first-time voters are dealing with at this moment.
Thank you. Jalen, my question to Sistine, why is it critical for Native youth to engage in the voting process, especially at the tribal, local, state, and national levels?
Thank you, Greg, for that question. For youth, I think a lot of them, just like how Jalen said, this is a new world for them. This is something that hasn't been taught a lot in schools as well. For myself, I voted for the first time in 2020, and that was during the pandemic. And I know during that pandemic, it hit a lot of us hard. A lot of youth didn't have access to resources of what the importance of voting was. But I know their vote counts a lot, not only in just tribal elections, but also our state elections as well, because there's a lot of things going on during the state that our youth are now coming to realization to see that it is affecting them now into future generations, that this could be water rights, it could be sacred sites, something just right there at the community that they don't take for granted until it actually happens, and governments start coming into it and they're starting to realize how much it's really playing an impact on them. And I think that's why it's so important that the youth are starting to realize, not only just through their tribal, but also through state, and now as well as national, that like Jayla mentioned, their vote really does count, and it does make a difference, because even if they don't think it is, it's going to. Just that one little vote, it can really deter everything and change a whole lot of the tribal governments as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sistine. I'm going to, as a former tribal leader, as tribal leaders, of course, our job is to formulate policies. And so this next section talks about the role of Native youth in shaping policy. And you know what? There's been many examples in Indian country. I just learned that a Navajo Youth Council from Navajo Prep, they actually took an issue to the Navajo Nation Tribal Council, and now, any junk food that you purchase on the Navajo reservation, they have an actual junk food tax. And that's a form of a policy, and that was created by young people. I know right here in the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, the Young River People's Youth Council, also took a major initiative by crafting legislation on no texting while driving. Do you see that signs installed over that say no texting while driving? If you see that, that was created by the community. So young people do have a lot of power when it comes to shaping policies. So with that, I'm going to ask Aiden this question. What are some policy issues most important to Native youth today? And how can voting impact those areas?
Thank you for that question. The first thing I really want to emphasize for Native youth is our environment. I'm an environmentalist at heart, and I'm really passionate about what's happening with our climate. As Native peoples, I think it's safe to say Indigenous communities are connected by our inherent connection to the land. There's a lot of relationships involved with that. We see there's life beyond what we have here in the city, and for me personally too, I'm worried about the future. We talked about why youth might be apprehensive to the vote. I mean, we've been advocating for climate initiatives and environmental issues for decades, and it seems like it's falling on deaf ears. And should that persist, how are we going to continue to encourage people when the issues that we're saying are important to us are being ignored by our legislatures? So climate change, it's October tomorrow, and we're still in triple digits. If you don't think climate change is a thing, I ask you to reconsider that opinion, because it's dire that we address these issues, and that's going to be our next movement. It's already happening. I won't say it's next. It's current right now. Native youth are worried about the future, and we want to have futures for our kids, and that comes with climate change initiatives. It's like moving to green energy, but making sure we do it in a just way. When I advocate for green energy, I learned that, the United States, we're talking about policy, is looking to move domestically with their resource extraction. How does that impact tribes? Are we having conversations about that? San Carlos Apache community is currently fighting the U.S. government for copper. Youth have been involved in that, in the Oak Flats initiative. That's an example. They want to build solar panels and wind panels on our reservations because it's obscured from the average U.S. citizen. We have to really think justly about how we do this next energy change, and that's something to think about with our youth. I will bring up women's rights next. As a woman myself, hopefully future mother, and thinking about all the matriarchs before me and the women in my life, our rights are on the ballot this year. It's unfortunate that my grandmother's generation already resolved this, but apparently their voices and our voices aren't strong enough. 70% of the nation agrees that abortion is a right, it's health care. There are no laws governing men's rights and access to health care. So that's another important thing. And I will say Prop 139 on the Arizona ballot, that is codifying abortion in our Arizona Constitution because they want to send it to the states. But even that's misrepresented because we have voter disenfranchisement. That's another example of youth being involved in policy. 2013 Shelby County v. Holder, the U.S. Constitution, or the U.S. Supreme Court overturned a clause that now allows states to change their voting laws so long as they, and that has caused a lot of issues for tribal communities. And we talked about voter disenfranchisement, gerrymandering, things like that. That impacts our youth too. So they, a lot of people, it's my job to know these things. It's not the average citizen's job to know these things. Our job is to make sure that it's easy for them. Implementing all these laws seems like a norm, but it's not normal. We should be able to vote. It should be automatic at 18, which is why I lobbied for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act at 18, 17. So, these are things, we want voting to be easier. We want to have healthy planet and healthy selves. We talk about agriculture. That's another area that youth are involved with. We want healthy foods. The amount of things that are in our food presently that cause healthcare issues. Healthcare is another issue in our communities. Diabetes, high blood pressure, that comes from the processed foods that they're feeding us because it's a whole thing. But there's a lot of different areas. So I will really echo that message about earth and climate change. How are we doing this in a just manner? This has to come to the forefront. There's only one planet, and this is where we need to come together. It doesn't matter your race, religion, creed, we all rely on the resources here. This building is cooled by water and solar, really putting those things together, and that's where youth are going to be on the forefront. Again, abortion, codify those rights, Prop 139 on the ballot this year. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. All of those issues that she brought up are just so important in this election. So again, Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask Jalen, in what ways can Native young voters advocate for issues like sovereignty, environmental protection, and education through the political participation?
I believe our youth are already doing that. You know, there's youth councils from all around the nation. There's over 300 youth councils that are working together to better their communities because they see the issues from the, firsthand. And with that, how Greg mentioned, there's youth councils here in Arizona, and they're already doing that. You know, that's the political way. You know, they have their resolution, they follow the order on their meetings and everything, and that's what they're doing. And I feel like a lot of tribal officials and elected officials tend to say our youth are leaders of tomorrow, but we are the leaders of today. And I believe that's a big thing that we really need to, accept, because it is true. We're the future leaders. We're the leaders that are making changes now. So I believe a lot of youth councils are already doing that within their different youth councils, within their respective communities, by either bringing up different initiatives of what they want to make change for. I know a lot of different youth councils, especially at the Phoenix Indian Center, big issues, are missing murdered Indigenous people here in the urban setting, but also all over Arizona and national. They take that change in their positions to make that change of having a walkathon and having those promotional materials to where they can post that and they could share with their schools and then their different families and communities, what the reality is. And so I believe that's a lot of, great things that a lot of youth are doing is, taking that initiative and healthy risk of running for these different positions within their youth councils and wanting to make change to see a better Indian country. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jalen. We're going to go into another topic area, and that has to do with overcoming historical challenges. I'm going to ask a question to Aiden. How has historical disenfranchisement affected Native communities, and how can young voters work to reverse these trends?
All right, thank you. I kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'll bring up that this year marks the 100-year anniversary of Indian citizenship, although my ancestors have been here much longer than that. Indian citizenship came with an interesting price. I will say that boarding school enrollment rates quadrupled after Indian citizenship was enacted. It took another 40-50 years for states to begin codifying rights to vote for Native Americans. My grandmother's generation couldn't vote because they spoke fluent Navajo but didn't know English, even though it's ancient and really beautiful language. And I will say, too, with historical disenfranchisement, in the 1960s, 1970s, the civil rights movement brought a lot of us the rights today to go to the polls without feeling, it almost feels like a chore today, but back then it was our right and it was something we needed to do. And they understood that, and we have to bring that back to the forefront. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 codified that. It made sure that discrimination wasn't going to be at the polls. But again, that Shelby County v. Holder case in 2013 struck two important clauses that allow states to change their voting laws. I will reference Arizona because I'm familiar with those law changes. An example is third-party ballot collections is now illegal in the state of Arizona. That was an important initiative for Native communities because if you ever visit the reservation, especially my home community, Navajo, it's a very rural, very sparse community, and it can take an individual at least 2 hours to get to the polls. It doesn't include all the time or even being an informed voter. And so they used to do rides, well, they do a ride to the polls presently, but they used to bus around the reservation and be able to collect for our elders, for our community members who didn't have the time. It's illegal now to do that, and that causes issues. Out of precinct voting, whenever I bring this up to any Arizonan, they're like, what's that? It's a law that was changed within the last decade that a lot of people were affected by because they didn't know they were voting out of precinct. That's another really good example. There's voter ID laws. I think I don't know, there's just a lot of different stuff. I really encourage you to check it out. I did a post, I do the social media for Phoenix Indian Center, so my goal is to really create an educated electorate. So there are some other examples there. But those are ways historical disenfranchisement is operating currently. And a way to address those issues is by going to the polls, having these conversations in our community. It does not go vote, but like look at what happens when we don't vote. What voices are left when we're not active in these conversations? When we don't bring our kids to these tables, who's left to advocate for us? So that's where we can make change. Propositions is another way to change the Arizona Constitution. It's organizing your community. It's grassroots work, sorry. Anyways, those are other ways that we can make laws and make them work for our communities. And, so that's why we have to continue to be active.
Thank you. We're going to ask our last question to Sistine. How can young voters address generational gaps in political participation within their families and tribal communities?
Thank you, Greg, for that question. So like as you mentioned, our youth play an important role, especially with the voting as well. And I've seen a lot of youth and the impact of social media, how much that is affecting them. And I know with the generational gaps, a lot of the older generations, as like their parents, their grandparents, they don't understand a whole lot of the social media aspect, but our youth do, and that's how they're able to communicate with one another and send things to them like, hey, we should go to this event, or did you guys see this, or they're seeing all these different things that are happening around in Indian country as well as here in Arizona that are happening to our tribes, our sister tribes, and other tribes here in Arizona that are small and they're having issues, but they're putting it and trying to bring it to light with these youth. And with the youth, they're able to voice their opinions and share it out on social media, and they have their followers that can follow back on it as well and show people that we do care about what's happening to our 22 tribes, and we know it's affecting not only just our tribe, but our other tribes are also being affected too, so we want to bring awareness to that. And I think one way the youth can do that as well is like share things with their parents as well, or even ask them a simple question. They'll be like, what is voting, or how can I do this? Ask them questions, so see if they know on their side what the importance of voting is as well, and they can also get acknowledged through that as well, and be, okay, yeah, maybe I should take into collective of that as well. If my son or daughter is wanting to learn more about voting, maybe I should be more educated through that so I can help them and get them to the right place to vote as well.
Thank you, Sistine. I want to thank our panelists, these awesome young ladies, for sharing their perspectives. Again, this is going to be a very important time in Indian country, and it's so important for us to get involved in this process. I know from my community, our tribal community, and when it comes to voting, we have our own Gila River Kids voting program. And the catch there is that the kids are allowed to go into the polling sites, but they have to bring their parents. So that's the catch. And it's been a wonderful program that has been operating since 1996, and we're the first tribe to incorporate a kids voting into an actual tribal, state, and federal election. So again, when we talk about examples of young people being involved in the process, our young people are doing that. We just need to continue to encourage them to participate in that process. I believe civic engagement should be a requirement for all of our schools. And it should be a requirement for graduation to understand tribal civics, understand not only their culture and language, but the process. They're a citizen of their own community, but of course we're a citizen of America. But again, young people should be given those opportunities. So again, thank you, Aiden, Jalen, and Sistine for a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you. For a question follow-up, anytime after this session. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing. That was an incredibly passionate panel, and as you can tell, our young people are doing everything they can to get themselves educated on these issues, and they're what we learned in 2020 are called a trusted messenger. They're having these conversations at the dinner table with their family and sharing what they know, what they've learned, what they've researched with their families so that everyone is making informed decisions. So thank you again for young folks that are leading the way. I'm happy to take us into our next presenter here. I'm very humbled and privileged to be introducing our next speaker. Mark Trahant is a founding member of what was called Indian Country Today. Many of us in this room know that as probably the first publication where we got our news and a lens into what's happening in Indian country. I know I used to use my library computer with dial-up and AOL discs to make sure that I could go online to this really long website called IndianCountryMediaToday.com just to learn a little bit more about what was happening with people like me and just learn about like-minded things in Indian country, because it was the only outlet that was really sharing a robust perspective. Mark was also inducted into the Native American Hall of Fame in 2023 for all of his efforts, and in Washington, D.C., before they took down the museum to honor him and all of his contributions to Indian country and journalism as a whole, his iconic glasses were inside of a glass case as a token of just a little bit about this man. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Mark Trahant.
Hopefully the slides will, not the right slide. Okay. Hi. Probably nothing more dangerous than talking about polling and demographics after lunch. But here we go. This is an amazing time in Arizona being a swing state. Is right now, pretty much every day on my cell phone I get texts from people wanting to have my take on something. Sometimes they're real polls, sometimes they're fake polls, but it just proves that in the TV commercials that this is a swing state. One just said recently, "We need your opinion because our future is at risk," and this is from a conservative text message. Another asked for a presidential straw poll, and it asked if I'm voting for Kamala Harris. The pro tip here is to look for clues, including the source, to see if it's a real poll or not. A marketing technique rather than a real question looking for an answer. The third text I received last week offered me $2 a gift card if I had answered a long set of questions. One of the things you can see is those that do offer those are almost always legit polls. Candidates don't want to spend money on nothing. All of those want the answer, who's winning? And that's the question. And that's where the polls can really be misleading. This is not a surprise to any of us. So many of us remember this slide. When CNN on election night in 2000 used an Arizona exit poll to reduce the indigenous vote to something else. CNN apologized later that night, quote, "Our exit poll results in a poor choice of words, and in no way did we intend to minimize the importance of indigenous communities and the Native American vote," CNN spokesman Allison Rednick told the Associated Press. Something else was a poor choice of words, but the problem is bigger than that. It's a problem of the choice of data. Let's take what we know about Arizona today. The average of all polls across the country show Vice President Kamala Harris with a 2.8% lead over former President Donald Trump, with 35 days to go. But there's uncertainty in those numbers. It says 538 in its methodology tab explaining why. It uses a color-coded thicker line above the polling graph. The way to look at polls is to think about the weather forecast. when an announcer comes on and says, "You may get 1 to 3 inches of rain in an upcoming storm." I like the storm metaphor because we see snow in Phoenix more often than we get an accurate reading of the Native American vote. Pew Research explains this error. Our polls exclude parts of the population. That would be us. The two most difficult demographic groups to capture in a poll are people of color in general, and especially Native Americans, and young people, two key polling factors. I think in 2024 in Arizona, both of these are going to be significant. The last panel was on youth, and I just recently visited with a group of young people in Tuba City, and I wanted to play this.
Shape our future, because
That young man is Ian Teller, and he's working very hard to turn out youth vote on the Navajo Nation. A couple of things he said that I think are so important. One is being in charge of the narrative and being able to figure out how to take that narrative and expand it. The other thing he said, and I know a lot of people here are working on access to the polls, and that's absolutely critical, but that second part of that is showing up, that elections are won by those who show up. And Ian's working to make sure that that happens. The average, and this gets back into the polls and why they're so confusing, the latest average of polls shows Trump in Arizona with a slight lead, 47.9% to 46.8%. And there's the graph, this is from 538 this morning. Now let's take a look at the same number with the idea of a thick marking pen rather than just a straight line graph. And you can see it's all over the map. This is my bad art, sorry. But if you think about a thick marking pen, it can be, if it's a 3-point margin of error, and the very first thing you should do when any time you look at a poll is look at that margin of error. But if it's a 3-point margin of error, that means it can go either way by 6 points. And in a state like Arizona, that's huge. So much there. Remember the 1 to 3 inches of snow. Second, and this is where I wanted to tie back into Ian, is if you look at the polls, you can also look at what's called crosstabs. And within the crosstabs, it'll tell you who has been picked to be weighted, to be included in this poll. And in the Arizona polls, very few, as in none, actually include Alaska Natives or Native American Indians. What's included is rural voters. So those are in Flagstaff. I would hope 1 or 2 people from Indian country. Usually in Arizona polls, there's 3 geographic markers. One would be Maricopa County, the second would be Pima County, and the third would be rural. And you think back to the ideas, in that poll they use a predictive model to figure out who's going to vote. And in this Arizona Noble Predictive, and I use them as an example because their crosstabs are so detailed, they've sampled 27% of their respondents were 18 to 34, compared to 27% of 65 plus. That figure also included 53% female and 40% male. But what if the electorate doesn't look like that? What if the electorate is younger? What if the electorate is more female? That changes the numbers, and that's where you get the 6% swing. It's also, if you look at history, one of the reasons why people are always surprised by Arizona. This is not a new thing, but it's because these polling numbers never include these voices, and then on election night, when the numbers come in from the north, people are surprised. The folks who do the polls counter, and they say that the problem is a small demographic group is difficult to track. If 1,000 people are surveyed, 5 would have to represent all of us. But my response to them is, what if all 5 vote? The biggest challenge for polling is determine what the electorate will look like. The key problem for that is who does vote. Pew Research says, surprisingly, polls historically have not shown any particular patterns of favoring one side or the other. The errors that favored Democrats in the past 8 years may be the result of the growth of political polarization, along with declining trust among conservatives and news organizations that do conduct polls. The idea of not counting doesn't sting any less. Of course, there are other ways to read polls. One can be, what's the trend? How does the number change over time? Even when the numbers are close, that story is interesting because it showed how quickly the race changed from when Harris entered the race and Joe Biden exited. Of course, a national poll doesn't matter anyway because the United States elects its presidents via the Electoral College, state by state. Most of the states are predetermined by demographics, red states, blue states. The contest would be one-sided if it were by popular vote. The last Republican to win a majority of national voters was George Bush in 2004. And so these states where the native vote matters, it's part of a larger story. Take Nevada. In 2012, when Barack Obama was reelected, that state was 65% white. This is what I wrote in my blog at the time. So it will be possible to build a winning coalition made up of some white voters, a third or so, plus significant majorities from Latino, African American, Asian American, and Native Americans. That's exactly what happened. In this cycle's election, the voting demographics in Arizona will only be about 45% white, or excuse me, Nevada. So a winning combination of Nevada looks different than it did even 4 years ago. The millennial people perceive age in elections. This was essentially the Obama coalition in 2008 and 2012, and we'll want to see if it's been reforged by Harris and Tim Walz. If you're waiting for a poll result, real numbers will start coming in about a week, and that's because early voting starts across the country. In much of the country, Election Day is really election month. Here in Arizona, some 81% of voters say they know whom they will vote for, and nothing will change their mind. 14% have a good idea of the candidate they will support and could change their mind, while 5% say they haven't made up their mind. 1 in 4 independents say they won't change their mind between now and Election Day. This means the most important factor is not what people think about voting, but whether they vote or not. I hit recently 50 years of reporting, so I've seen a few things in my career. And now that I'm a senior, I really see the difference in how older people vote and how important that is. Former President Jimmy Carter is a great example of this. He said, he turns 100 years old this week, and he said that he's determined to stay alive until after Election Day because he wants his last vote to be for Kamala Harris. But it's not just the Carters. If you look at the data, almost every senior, the minute they get their ballot, they vote. And that's because they want it to count. They want to make sure it counts, and they do it as fast as they can. And that, I think, is an important message for Indian country. Voting early, voting by mail, or at official centers is a key element to participation. Already, 75% of Arizonans vote this way, and for many years I was editorial page editor of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and in Washington State, 100% of the vote is by mail. Jonathan Nez was at that same conference in Tuba City, and he spoke about one of the communities he's trying to represent in Congress. And he said it's a Republican district, and it's a little bit daunting because that district has a turnout rate of 75%. Imagine what 75% could do across Indian country if it were Arizona natives. In fact, I did the math. It would be a little more than 150,000 votes. If I had a magic wand, there'd be 2 things I'd change about Native participation in voting. First, we would all vote early, and second, we would vote in every primary. And those 2 thoughts are connected. I mentioned the 75% turnout. Think about who else is voting and who's not voting. Again, what Ian Teller said. Those are at the conference. We know that Arizona's makeup, its demographics are changing, and the percentage of white voters continue to shrink. One of those demographic nuances is associated with Donald Trump, and that's his association with white working-class voters. It's unprecedented. White college-educated voters actually have numbers very similar to Native American voters. Arizona's last election was a case in point. In 2022, the Brookings Institution found that white college graduate women and men flipped sharply toward the Democrats from 2016. Likewise, non-college men reduced their Republican support from 28 to 10%, and Arizona's senior population, for the first time ever 4 years ago, flipped from Republican to supporting Democrat, Republican kind of mixed bag support. These shifts, as well as increased Democratic support among 18 to 29-year-olds and continued demographic support from Latino voters, continues to show how Arizona turned blue last time. 2 years ago, something else happened, and I'll give a shout out to my spouse, Janie Parrish, for the work of Arizona Native Vote. In the mid-year turnout was almost comparable to a presidential election year. That is really crucial. It's an absolute math equation that the smaller the election pool, the more impact that small populations, including Indian country, can have on the results. This is the power of the native vote, and it's proof why we should absolutely vote in every election. Again, back to the strategy question. My election day is about 4 or 5 days from now. My mail ballot will arrive, and I'll do a take-home test. This year's ballot is loaded up with measures. Some of them are contradictory. So the best way to sort through this mess is to take time and be sure of the votes. For example, there was a retention election for Supreme Court justices, a yes or no for those on the ballot. However, one of the propositions, 137, would take away the right of people to have an election to retain judges. So in one ballot, you could vote for judges, have them removed, and on the same ballot, you could vote against your right to ever do that again, and your votes for the 2 judges would not count. 3 are on competing ballot measures that require research. For many years, I was an editorial page editor, and we got a lot of attention for our endorsements. And one of the cool things is when presidential candidates would come in, and we'd get to interview them, and it was a big deal. But really, the one that makes more sense is the down ballot endorsements. And those are the things like Supreme Court members, judges, school board members. Those are the ones that are really important because so many of our readers clipped those names and took them to the polls. That's something that's still missing in Indian country, to have that kind of referendum ability. Let me wrap up with this. Like I said, this is a tough subject for after lunch. But I've been reporting elections for 50 years, and I've seen extraordinary progress. About 20 years ago, I started keeping track of candidates, and I chronicled the steady number of candidates seeking to represent not just Indian country, but their regions, their states, and their nations. I remember the year I was sitting in 2018 when Deb Holland and Sharice were elected, Davids were elected, and I was looking at the data on my spreadsheet, and it was the first time I ever saw more women than men running for office. And it was only because we had that database that we could look at and see how things were changing. Here's the thing. We have so far to go yet. If you look at the next ballot in the next couple of years, it's really likely in the next couple of cycles, we're going to have 3 Native American women running for governors of state. On top of that, there'll be more Native women and men running for Congress, the U.S. Senate, state legislatures. But as advanced Native political leadership reports, that totals less than 1% of elected offices, 0.7% to be exact. In order to reach parity with our population, we need to elect 17,000 people across the board. And that includes offices from county water commissions and county commissions, all the way up through sheriffs and other offices. And all of that starts with just one ballot. So, thank you.
Oh, man, I thought that was mine. I've been a fan of Mark's for years and years, and, everything he's talking about is really true. When you do get out the vote effort within your community as a reservation, your goal is to hit that 55, 60, 70%. I mean, that's always been our goal. And so when you're doing GOTV, when we started, we used to use the elders and have the elders talk to the family. Times have changed. Now we look at the youth to talk to their brothers or sisters, their mom, their dad, their aunts, their uncles, and their grandma, and say, come on, Grandma, let's go do this. And so, Skoden. But, you know, it's really important. I can't stress it enough of how important each and every one of our votes are. In the end of the day, I mean, you just heard a discussion, whether we like it or not, you know, Congress is going to decide on water rights, I mean, treaty rights. And by you electing individuals that understand your issues, you're protecting your treaties and you're protecting your sovereignty. So with that, we're going to take a small break. We have Laura Pastor. She's a City of Phoenix councilwoman. She'll come up and address everybody real quick, and then we'll get right on into our next guest, which will be Quincy Smith with the Arizona District 9. So take about a 5-minute break, come back in, and we'll get the ball rolling. Thank you. There we go. If we have people start coming back in, taking their seats, we'll start our program. I always tell people we have an agenda, Indian time. While we're getting stuff ready, tomorrow morning, we are going to be serving breakfast at 8 a.m. So if you're hungry, you get up, come on down, have a free breakfast, get some coffee, some juice, and some delicious food. They do serve some delicious food there, so. Justin, you want to hold off and we're ready to go? What's the scoop? All right, let's play this and then we'll get it going.
My generation still feels it, you know, and his generation feels it, and we want to start healing somewhere and making sure this is corrected to the best of their ability, I guess.
We didn't get no justice, you know, so, and, you know, if, I feel that if the United States government was to let Leonard free, that'll do justice for all Indian country, not just one nation, but for all Indian country. And that's what needs to happen. Nations need to come together, and by doing that, would be a great start for the healing process.
Back in February of 1974, I was in Flanders, South Dakota. And, you know, while Leonard Pelletier, Dennis Banks, Claude Belcourt, and Russell Williams all came because, you know, we had someone from Pine Ridge that was, they were going to take him and this girl had a baby, and so they were trying to take the baby away, you know, like, just like steal him and give the baby away. A lot of us lost relatives and whatnot, and just taking our babies or our relatives away. And so that's what, that always stuck with me. These men were, like the president said, they were warriors helping their people.
The compassionate release of land Pelletier stands for me. We need that justice. We need confirmation that we are humans with equal rights to people who are non-Indian, who do not have that struggles, that our existence is valid and that we have a right to it. And it is so important that we carry on despite that we get that equal treatment.
In spite of all the historical trauma that our people have endured and have been through, I think that these little things like this help us to heal. And eventually one day, I hope to see it before I'm gone, that my children and my grandchildren are going to be able to see some kind of justice for our people. So the healing of all the historical trauma that our people have went through. It's very emotional because I still carry that. Like they say, we haven't even started our healing process. From when massacres happen, we haven't begun our healing process. It still hurts. Thank you. But we need more help from all of the Indians, all the Indian nation, the whole Indian nation as a whole. One, let's become one, not separate entities, but one, come together. Okay, Congress, here we are. We need you to come and honor what was supposedly given to us way back when.
And to this day, he's sitting there for no reason, we believe. And that needs to change. It's time to let him out.
You know, we always talk about, earlier I talked about, you know, county commissioners, school boards, But this is another reason why we have to use our voice. We have Native American activists that have been put in prison for actions that most people would not go to prison for. I don't know if you know the history, but he was actually, went to trial. They wouldn't do it in South Dakota, so they switched jurisdiction and put him in North Dakota. And that's where they got a conviction. All the other ones that were with him were, the charge were either dismissed or they're acquitted. So there's always more than just one reason to vote. And you'll probably hear about this later too, but I just want to let you know, we did a Get Out the Vote effort in Wisconsin. And during that time, there was judges that were seeking election. And in Sawyer County, where we did a Get Out the Vote, we were able to help elect a judge that knew more about Native issues and problems. And, you know, the majority of the people that were in jail there and looking at felonies were Native Americans in Wisconsin. Until we got to Get Out the Vote and we got another judge elected, it dropped 61% of Natives being incarcerated. So there's more than one reason for you to vote. Yes, treaties and trust, but there's also another, like I talked about earlier, removing the STAIN Act. Now we have Leonard Peltier. You know, we talked about it again, water rights. It's just so important that you know it. And that's why we invited candidates here, is for you to hear what they have to say and for them to hear what you have to say. That's how we learn. That's how we educate each other. So with that, I would like to call, I'll find you, Quincy. How do I say it? Okay, Mr. Smith. Why don't you come on up? Mr. Smith is a candidate, and he's running for the Arizona District 9 in the House of Representatives, Congress. And with that, sir, please come on up.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for having me this afternoon. My name is Quasi. He got close. He said Quincy, but Quasi, kind of like Casey, but with a Q. Last name is a little easier. It's Quasi Smith is my last name, and it's an honor to be here with you all this afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. Of course, I want to give recognition to all of the organizers and tribal leaders that are here present with us this afternoon, and of course to all of the elders and all of you fine folks that make up the Native community that is so critical to us as a nation, particularly to us as a state. I am running for Congress, for the United States Congress, in Arizona's 9th Congressional District. That is everything from Glendale Stadium all the way to the California border, west to the California border, up north all the way to the Utah-Nevada border, south all the way to the Mexican border with Yuma. And so it is, I think, by geography, I think it's the second biggest district in the state of Arizona. Within our congressional district, we have a number of tribes, Indian tribes within our district, of course the Colorado River Indian tribes that are out there, and I'll talk more about that briefly. And so I want to say this, and you'll hear from a lot of people today, and I hope you hear from my heart more than talking points and whatnot from my heart concerning our Native brothers and sisters. Because there's some things that I believe deeply concerning the Native community, and I don't just believe it in word, I believe it in deed. I'm one that believes that well done is better than well said, because you hear a lot of folks that talk a good game, but when the rubber meets the road, are they going to do what's necessary to protect and to defend and fight for not just the Constitution, and not just for the United States of America, but to the people that I believe in my heart we owe the biggest duty to, and that is our native communities. We as a country, as a state, we owe the greatest duty to ensure that we're doing everything possible to make sure that our native brothers and sisters are taken care of fully. And again, I mean that not just in word, but I mean that in deed. You would say, well, Mr. Smith, you sound good so far, but how do we know you're not bull jiving us, for lack of better words? Well, I was raised, I'm not a city boy from Central Phoenix. I was raised, and some of you that are from that area out there, I was raised in Blythe, California, right out there on the Colorado River. And all of my life, we were raised around the Colorado River Indian tribes and those communities that were out there. We grew up swimming with them. Every time we'd go to Parker to play sports and whatnot, you'd have to go through tribal land and whatnot. And so we had to learn the Indian culture and the beauty of Indian culture. And this is all of my childhood growing up. Even when I was a police officer, we would do interpack stuff where we would have to come over to assist the tribal police out there with different things that were going on. My service in that area and getting acquainted with tribal communities didn't just start as a police officer or growing up as a youngster. But right now, I'm a practicing attorney, own a law firm downtown, and I want you all to hear this. One of the first things that I did when I opened my law firm downtown, one of the first things that I did was reach out to the Colorado River Indian tribes, to that community. Lawyers get paid, a few dollars an hour, but I went back out to the tribal community, and I reduced our hourly rate by 60%. To go out and serve in the tribal courts out there for years. In fact, we still serve in the tribal courts out there in years, on the criminal side and on the civil side. Every single day, there are people in my office, the law firm that I own, serving tribal communities, dealing with things like ICRA and other things that we had to become familiar to make sure that the people in that area that don't necessarily live in a high tax base area are served. Folks that I know you have the Navajo communities up here, but the smaller tribes down on the western side of the state that need attention and that need service. This is what we have done. And I think, oh my God, we've served out there at least the last 7 or 8 years and still serving. Today, there were hearings out there that lawyers in my office were taken care of because the people out there deserve representation and they deserve to be taken care of. This election is it's important, you all, and I want to be very clear about it. It's more important than any election in my lifetime. I'm 28 plus shipping and handling, and getting a little old. I used to have hair, believe it or not. I used to have a big old afro, and I don't have any of that anymore. And I got gray hairs, and I move a little slower. I used to jump up out of the bed. Now I get up and sit on the side of the bed first and make sure that all of me got up with me, And so but this election is probably the most important election that I've seen in my lifetime. And I literally mean that. It is a critically important election. And this election is not just about a win for a party. I'm a Democrat, not an extremist by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think anybody's winning when we keep going into these extreme levels. But I'm a Democrat, but I'll say this directly. This election is not about a win for a party. It's about a win for people. And if we don't get back to it, and I'm not a lifelong politician, it's the first time I've run for anything, but I want to be clear about it. This is what Kwesi Smith is about. If I'm your congressman in the 9th Congressional District, I need you to call all of your tribal family members and friends and stuff out there and tell them, you need to look into this guy. I'm about a win for people. I've been about a win for people all of my life. For people who may love differently, look differently, lead differently, may live different lives than you live, but it's about a win for people. And if we ever get away from a win for people, we're losing as a nation. We're losing for people that we owe the greatest duty to. And I just believe that if we keep the focus on people, it's not about just defeating a person. It's about defending a people from policies and positions that sound good as long as you're not listening to them. It's about people, and if we keep it about the people, let me give an. I told you guys the service that I did and still do in the tribal communities, even through COVID. Do you all know that twice and sometimes 3 times a week, I would get in my car from Central Avenue on Phoenix, Arizona, and drive all the way to Parker, Arizona, and back, just to appear in court to defend juveniles that had been arrested, to make sure that they weren't being properly charged. This is what the service that I've done to the Indian and done for the Indian communities. And there's so much more that can be done. We have to defend the people away from politicians and policies that divide us, that are devised against us, that folks that are playing sleight of hand with people. And unfortunately, in the 9th Congressional District, we've had that. Mr. Gosar is the current representative out there, and I try to be nice about it, because I try to be a good, young Christian man, but this guy's just not a good guy. There's no two ways about it. He's just not a good guy, and I try to come up with something positive to say, because I want to be fair. I think the people should decide, but I just have the most difficult time coming up with it, especially, and I want to say this, especially as it relates to indigenous people. He has done them the most damage out there in that area, and you don't have to take my word for it. Go look at the record. Let me point to a couple of things. A couple of things that are very important to folks up in that area, and really the Navajo communities and whatnot, is this issue with mining. I'm grateful for President Biden for passing that legislation that designated those areas up there as sacred and as a national monument. Is anybody grateful for that? I'm glad that you can go drill somewhere else. Go mine somewhere else. The only thing that indigenous people were asking for in that area is protect us. You want to go drill from uranium, but that ground in the Colorado or in Grand Canyon area, it's so fractured that you can't control where the runoff is going, and you can contaminate an already strained water source. There are still people out in Parker, Arizona on tribal land that have deficient internet service, that have issues with running water. And I'm not telling you what I read in a magazine. I've been there. I grew up out in that area. I know where 100 Homes is. You know what I mean? I know where that stuff is. I drive through. I got friends and people that I love out there. And as a nation, we can do better. Most of the city of Parker is surrounded by tribal lands. And if we don't protect these sacred resources, and my opponent, Paul Gosar, when the Native folks simply just asked, protect these lands. President Biden passed the legislation, and today Paul Gosar is doing everything in his power to reverse President Biden's designation of those lands. He's passing legislation to get it overturned every single day. When the tribal leaders came to him and said, this is sacred lands that we do our prayers and different things on, you know what his response was? Well, that could be true about any land. It's like, what? This is land that is, and I can't understand it for the life of me. These are lands that have been sacred for years. Long before we got here, these lands were sacred to people, and I don't think it's too much to ask to tell these folks that are going to pay him off to go drill somewhere else. I just don't think that's for allocate the water if the people offenders aren't used as a lot of issues and are Native communities. Well, here I'm asking protection in the air. I'm the flying swine. I'm not going to want the children that did still in Parker on tribal land. Then I want to make sure they are living the life that they deserve to live. But it's going to take more than just local support. It's going to take congressional support. And I tell you, all the Native communities, those that are out in my district, and the others, the parts of the Navajo community and other tribal communities, there are more than 24 of them in the state. You will have an absolute ally in Congress when I get there in January. And I will do whatever I can to make sure that we are fulfilling our duty and obligation to the most sacred and devout commitment that we have as a people, and that is to our indigenous and tribal communities. There's a lot that can be done, but we have to get rid of these people that are talking a good game, and when they get there, they're not doing the work. They don't visit your community. They don't sit with tribal leaders. They don't visit the elders, and they don't do the only thing they do is what's necessary to get reelected again, instead of making sure that the win is for the people. And so I'm asking you for your support and your vote in this. Again, as I said earlier, I do believe that this election, I am the better choice than my opponent, Paul Gosar, and I promise to be a congressman that represents all people, not just black people, not just white people, not just Latino people, but also represent the Native American community that we owe the greatest duty to. Thank you, thank you, thank you for letting me come share this moment with you. Please encourage your family. Family members, other tribal members, to get out and vote. This election matters. There's some stuff on the horizon that's really, really real. I shudder at some of the stuff that I read in this Project 2025. This is not about being against the Republican Party. It's about being against an idea that takes us further away from we the people. When that we the people was written, we were not included in it. But when I get to Congress, I'll make sure that every we in this room is a part of that we the people, and I will protect you with everything that is within me. You will have an absolute ally in the United States Congress. Thank you so much, and please encourage everyone to get out and vote. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Okay, we have an actual special guest that is actually from the city of Phoenix. She's a councilwoman there. I'd like to have her come up and say a few words. Lori Pastor. I'll see if I got her name right.
Thank you for doing this. I need this. Thank you. As you heard, my name is Laura Pastor, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. And good afternoon. It's actually an honor to stand here with all of you today on the homeland of the Tohono O'odham and the Pipash people. As we gather, we recognize the power of our collective voices, and our vote is unmatched. Native American people have long faced challenges and systematic barriers. It's only been 1948 that Native people have secured the right to vote in this state. And ongoing barriers are still present, from voter ID laws to gerrymandering to polling locations accessibility and more. These barriers are strategically put in place to stop Native American people from taking advantage of their voting rights and making meaningful change in our communities. In 2016, just think about this, only 38 out of 300 eligible voters in the Havasupai tribe voted. In 2018, the Arizona U.S. Senate race was decided by only 55,000 voters. There are 309 Native Americans living in Arizona, half of which are of voting age, living on tribal lands. Today, we have an opportunity to face these challenges, innovate, and ensure that all our voices are heard and respected at the ballot box. This upcoming election is a moment to stand up for our communities, our families, and our future. Every single vote matters, and every vote from this community carries the weight of history, pride, and justice. When Native people show up at the polls, you send a clear message that we cannot be ignored. We need more funding and attention to our missing murdered Indigenous people that have disappeared from our families and our communities. Let's make sure our elders, our youth, our families, everyone knows how critical their participation is. My elder and elders taught me the voice to speak up when injustice happens. They taught me to say what's wrong in our community. And they taught me to stand with them along with others to make change happen. I am a product of them, and I'm here today because of them. So when our collective voices are powerful and together, we shape the future that reflects the values of our people. So most importantly, let's continue to make history. Let's continue to vote, and let's make it happen. Thank you for Directions, Native Vote, Phoenix Indian Center, and everyone involved in bringing this event together, because it's still important, even though it's been happening for 20 years. Thank you. I appreciate you.
And then thank you very much for taking time to be here. The next speaker we got, I think everybody knows. She couldn't bring her horse in here, but I'm pretty sure she'll still get you the polls. Allie Young, where you be? We're really honored that she wanted to participate in this forum as a partner, and very proud of what she's been doing in Indian country. So with that, Allie.
Yeah, were we gonna play a video? Oh, no, that's not the
Water is life. This is something we have always believed in. Water brings life to our crops, our medicine, and ourselves. It is sacred to us.
It's a Vimeo video.
Ride to the Polls started in 2020. My dad and I rode on horseback with riders from this area to cast their ballots at polling locations. Horseback was a representation of honoring our ancestors who had no choice but to vote that way, to make their voices heard that way because they had no other transportation. Skate to the Polls is riding on skateboards to a voter registration event because our youth are passionate about that sport and we wanted to meet them where they are.
Now is the time for us to speak up. It's time to let your native voice be heard in the polls. There's no more sitting around like a shy little Indian. Those days are gone.
From my experience, like, you do have to talk to the leaders. You do have to be able to work with them because they're going to be people that are going to help you do what you do. It's important to elect people that align with your vision or, you know, what you think or what you want to see.
Candidates need to come out into Indian country. 30-40% of the Navajo people don't have running water in the most powerful country in the world. So it's very important that indigenous people of color, go to the polls and vote.
What that means by reclaiming our spaces on a bigger scale in the whole United States, we're making sure that we're seen and that we're heard, and that the rest of the United States understands that not only is the Navajo Nation still here, but the rest of the 500 plus tribes in the whole United States. Voting doesn't have to be boring. Voting can be interesting. And when you turn up to the polls in ways that are grounded in your culture, in ways that represent your community, it is fun.
Thank you. So yat she Ali Red Horse Young and she totsani nashle to hana bashish chin nakaidene dashiche nat odene tachini dashinelle. Thank you to Four Directions Native Vote and Phoenix Indian Center and all the partners for inviting me here today. That was one of the videos that we produced from our 2022 midterms elections, Ride to the Polls GOTV campaign. And I thought it was a great way to start off my conversation here today about getting out the Native vote and how we at Protect the Sacred and Ride to the Polls ground our work in culture, and now, you know, we talk about it in the sense of subcultures. So Protect the Sacred was founded in 2020 around COVID relief work in the Navajo Nation. And then from there, really started to do census outreach because we were encouraging our people at the time to make sure that we're represented and to make sure that we're getting the dollars that our communities deserve. And then right after the census was a very important election. And so for me, I decided to get deeply involved in my community because I truly believe in the power of the Native vote and our potential and how we're seeing how we're reclaiming and rebuilding that power since 2020 and even before. You know, this work is on the shoulders of many amazing organizers in Indian country that have been doing this work long before I have, or those who really got involved in 2020. And so in 2020, with COVID happening, and especially the Navajo Nation being we were devastated. We were considered the #1 hotspot in the country per capita. And I the work that I did that year was really dedicated to the elders that we had lost and the community members that were, the case numbers that were rising, the death toll. And I was trying to communicate to our young voters and our youth and our community that, we were, that year, we were being involved civically, beyond ourselves. And it was really about doing it in honor of those who had lost their voices that year, who couldn't turn out at the polls because they lost their lives or they were, up in a hospital bed and recovering from COVID. And so that's what really drove me. And also in 2020, I heard, it was a lot of watching the news, and I heard John King from CNN talk about his hypothesis of what was going to happen in the state of Arizona. And I remember him saying, Arizona is not going to flip because Arizona has Republican DNA. And when I heard that, I was like, wait a minute. No, Arizona has indigenous DNA. And so I wanted our people to hear that message loud and clear. Let's show them, what Arizona and what America is made of, and that is indigenous peoples and our contribution to this country and to American democracy. And that's really what drove me. It wasn't that I was saying, hold up, it doesn't have Republican DNA, it has Democratic DNA. It was that this state in this country has indigenous DNA. And then I started to do some voter outreach work, but then it wasn't working because the young people rightfully were pushing back against me and saying, why are you continuing to, why are you encouraging our people to continue participating in a system that was not designed for us and has never worked for us? And I was like, wow. Like that, one, that is completely true, and I agree with you. But it also stopped me in my tracks because I was very impressed with those critical questions that our young people are asking. And it made me very proud and hopeful for our future, but it also made me stop and think about, okay, how do I reach the young people, and how do we craft messaging that will resonate with them? And so while I was taking a step back and thinking about it, I talked to my dad about it. And my dad, I grew up in a rodeo family and around horse culture, started riding horses when I was a baby, and come from a long line of bull riders. And my dad and I, no matter where I was in the country, going to school on the East Coast or living in LA, every time I would come home, my dad and I would go ride in a trail ride. And it was my way of reconnecting to home and my culture. And when I talked with him, he said, why don't we do a trail ride? Why don't we ride our horses? And he said, because in this work, and he's always in my head and always reminding me to connect everything that I do to my culture and to my language. And so he said, when he said that, I said, you know what, I think that's powerful. And I think it's a great way to bring our folks, our community back to Huizhong, which in Navajo means beauty and balance. And part of our culture is what we call horse medicine. And we believe that when we're on that horse and we're in rhythm and we're in sync with that horse, it reconnects us to Mother Earth, and it reminds us of everything that we're fighting for as a people, to protect the sacred. And that means protecting our elders and their ancestral knowledge and their languages, our languages, and our traditional values. And that's what I wanted our people to arrive at the polls with that horse medicine. And I wanted them to ground themselves in that. And I said, okay, let's do it. And we did one horseback ride in the early voting period in 2020. And I was actually surprised that people showed up and rode with us. I thought it was just going to be the two of us. And then on election day, we had like double the riders. And so that told me that this message about what we already know as a community, that the decisions that we make today impact future generations, but also calls back to our ancestors and our history, and again, the shoulders that were. And that's what Ride to the Polls was about in 2020. And then in 2022, we decided to build on that idea, but in 2022, I wanted to do something that was for the youth, that was for the young people, and that's where Skate to the Polls came into play. I was playing on the idea of riding to the polls and what other ways can we get to the polls, what other modes of transportation can we utilize. And I wanted this messaging to reach our young people, so, and I know that the skateboarding culture the popularity of it has risen across Indian country because of the investment of skate parks across our reservation and tribal communities. And so called up Douglas Miles from Apache Skateboards, and I said, do you want to do this event with us? And that's how Skate to the Polls came together, and again, was just floored by the engagement and how it resonated with our young people and how excited they were to participate. And then moving on to 2024, this year, where, the way that I talk about Ride to the Polls now is that we're trying to engage with the subcultures of Indigenous communities. And, we always talk about how diverse our, the Native American population is because of the 570 plus federally recognized tribes that exist in this country. But I want to go beyond, the diversity of that many tribes. I want to talk about the diversity within each of those tribes and how our young people connect to different subcultures like skate culture, metal culture, metalheads, cowboy culture, and how many of our young people are involved in bull riding and rodeo or skateboarding or hip hop artists and the hip hop community. And so that's what this year's movement is about. And we actually kicked it off September 14th, a few weeks ago, when we held our Skate for Democracy skateboarding competition in Tuba City with a metal concert, and these are all voter registration events. And then my dad and I hopped on our horses and rode for 6 days across the Navajo Nation, from Kayenta to Window Rock to register voters, and we worked with our partner Arizona Native Vote along the way and stopped in 6 rural communities across the Navajo Nation. And then on Saturday, September 21st, we ended with our Ride for Democracy bull riding and country concert, which is also a voter registration event. And again, it was about reaching every demographic of Indian country. And coming up, we're moving into the early voting period. We have our Walk to the Polls with Mark Ruffalo, and we made that announcement on Friday. If everyone is invited, all allies are welcome to come walk with us in solidarity. But Walk to the Polls will happen in Fort Defiance, Arizona, which is where the Navajo Long Walk began. And this is, again, our work is always grounded in honoring our ancestors and our histories. And part of Native American history is a very dark history. And the Navajo Long Walk is a very dark memory for our people. But we're taught, the reason that we're starting it there and also commemorating the Navajo Long Walk is to communicate to the rest of the world that we're still here and look at how far we've come in all of our beautiful diversity and with our allies. And so come join us on October 12th. Folks who are from the area are invited to bring their early ballots and drop it in the ballot drop box there in Fort Defiance, and then we're gonna have a community celebration in Window Rock, Arizona. And then on Election Day, November 5th, we're gonna do our OG ride on horseback to the polls. But that's the work that I do, and it's really, again, about grounding these activations and these movements in culture and in pop culture, and remembering that our young people are interested in so many things, and always first, in my experience, is our culture. But there are other interests that they that grab their attention, and I think that we should be taking that into account as well. Yeah, thank you.
When you see somebody that young, that committed to, strengthening our people, I think that what she's doing is just amazing. Before we bring our special guest on, what I would like everybody to do, especially tribal leaders, I would like everybody to come up front. And I can see you. If you don't move, I know you didn't come up front. You know I'm Sue. I'm supposed to be able to see these things. So come on, it's going to be 15 minutes. Come on up front, find a seat. Hmm? 300? And just so you know, right now this is being played live stream on YouTube, as I said earlier, and Facebook, not just Four Directions Facebook page, but it's being shared with other organizations. Right now, just on our live stream, we have 300 viewers, and we'll get more. I mean, this is the first day, and someone woke up and decided that they're going to see what our webpage said. So you're talking to more than just what is here, is what I'm saying. And I really appreciate everybody being here. Now with that, are we ready? Almost? I'm going to tell you a little bit of history. My wife will be coming in with Stacey Abrams, but we actually go back a long ways. Way back, we did the Get Out the Vote in Georgia, and we worked with Stacey's organization, Fair Fight, and I'll say, why be fair? But anyway, that's what they called it, in Fair Count. And we really developed a friendship and a family relationship in which they, come to our ceremonies. They have stayed out in the bad storms that come through South Dakota. But one of the things they've did, and this is why I want you, the other organizations, when we were doing Get Out the Vote in Wisconsin, we didn't have the data or the technology that Stacey's team had, whether it was in Fair Count or Fair Fight. And what they did is they actually worked with us, and they sent out hundreds of thousands of texts to voters, native voters in Wisconsin. And then they gave us a map of all the native people within certain areas of the Wisconsin reservation, so we could actually hunt them down. I'm an old cop, so if you give me a piece of paper that has your name on it, I can find you. And that's what they did. They had the name, they had the address. One of the things that we as Four Directions have been doing is taking and doing surveys. And our surveys are really different. If you look at vans, whether the Republican Party or Democratic Party, if you look at their vans, they don't identify Native Americans. Nevada alone, they have identified of the thousands of voters, 340-something Native Americans within that van. And so what we've been doing is our surveys consist of this. Are you, your name, are you registered to vote? Do you want to register to vote? And your cell number. And then the next 15 questions is open your phone, give us the name of your family, where they live, and their cell number. And within hours, we were able to, like in Montana, we were able to get like 1,500, not only names, but their cell phone numbers for possible working and getting out the vote. And we went to Navajo and we did that, and we got like 2,500 in a couple hours. And so what we're doing is developing our own Native American van in different parts of Indian country, but not just with names, but with the gold mine cell phone numbers. So I mean, if organizations are out there doing things, think about doing stuff like that, because you're going to be able to not only check with them if they're going to vote, but possible workers. And you're going to have information that nobody else has, and that's the actual name, knowing that they're Native American, and their cell number. So I mean, to us, cells are sacred. Okay, with that, let me see if we're ready. Okay, why don't you bring them in? What I'm waiting for is, I can't say it until my wife gets here. She has to introduce her, otherwise I'm in trouble. And this is our little sister, Janine. Well, wait, in case you don't know it, I mean, Four Directions, we're a family outfit, so this is our granddaughter. What is her real name?
Donna Brandel.
Donna. You know how you have nicknames for grandkids and stuff? I can't remember the real one sometimes. And then we have our daughter, Donna. And then we have our little sister, Janine. And then as you're coming in, if you saw when you're checking in, that's our other granddaughter, Katrina. And then we had Jillian, who's also related, and then Chun. Wait, I got to tell you this while we're waiting for Stacy. Mr. Tracy King, okay, he's our chairman, but they call him Ching, okay? So we were going to have Chun sit with Ching, so we'd have Chung Ching. but they wouldn't get together, so. Okay, what'd you guys do with Stacy?
Although they're going to introduce you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yep. You can sit. It's on.
It's on? Is it on? I would like to introduce this lady to you, who's like a sister to us, and she is such a great lady. I'd like to introduce Stacey Abrams from Georgia.
What? Oh, we've been hugging.
Oh, yeah. We hugged out behind the curtain.
OJ, Barb is always ahead of you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for taking pictures of me. It is my honor to be here, and there is nowhere else I would be. Because I know stories are important, I want to tell you a story about Georgia. I grew up in Mississippi, came of age in Georgia, left to go to Texas for graduate school, went to Connecticut for law school, came back south as soon as humanly possible because I don't like being cold, and planted my flag in Georgia. I lived in a state that for most of my life did not really see me, either in Mississippi or in Georgia. I lived in Mississippi at a time when, yes, the civil rights movement had happened, but there were still struggles, where my mother, who was a college librarian, could make less money than the janitor who cleaned the college because of her race and her gender. Where my father, who was dyslexic, faced discrimination and missed opportunity. But I also grew up in a family that believed that when you see something, you say something, but more importantly, you do something. So when I came back to Georgia in 1999, I didn't think I was going to be involved in state politics. My biggest ambition was to work with the city of Atlanta to help make Atlanta stronger. But over time, I became more and more involved in state politics because I served as deputy city attorney for the city of Atlanta. And part of my job was going across the street to the state capitol, where they were passing law after law after law to hurt more and more of the people I cared about. So finally in 2006, I got tired of it and I ran for the state legislature. I ran for this job because I thought it was important that we have a voice, even in places where our voices were going to be muted, even in places where we were in the minority. Georgia had been a Democratic stronghold for 130 years, and I know this is a nonpartisan space, but I will have to use party names to describe my story. Well, Georgia had been a Democratic stronghold for 130 years until 2002, when the governor's mansion flipped. And then it was a quick fall, where by 2006 they had majorities in the House and the Senate, they held the governor's office. And when I got elected, I was in the minority. I worked with my colleagues, worked on both sides of the aisle to get things done. But there was this day in 2010, this conversation at the Capitol, where I saw leaders, people who'd been elected to serve this state that I loved, who went to the podium, person after person, to argue for a tax cut for the wealthiest Georgians, saying that they needed more money than they had already, even though they had most of the money. And then a few hours later, I saw the same people, person after person, go to the poll, go to the well, and give impassioned speeches against what was a $5, $10, $20 credit that was going to the poorest Georgians. Their argument for the wealthy tax cut was that they needed it if we wanted them to stay, but their argument for taking away money out of the pockets of the poorest among us was they didn't deserve it. If they deserved it, they would have earned more. And that broke my heart, and it enraged my spirit. And so I decided that evening that I was going to run to be the minority leader. Now, mind you, I'd only been there for 4 years, so that was a bit of an audacious decision, but hey, why not? So that November, we had an election, and in the state of Georgia, you run for leadership positions a week after the election. Well, the election happened, and Democrats who'd been clinging on by their fingernails got wiped out. We lost every statewide election. The House was within a few dozen of becoming a supermajority for Republicans. The Senate, we only had 3 people without them getting it, and they were going to get it by the next year. And so I still raised my hand and said, I want to serve as minority leader. Well, when I stood and asked my colleagues to vote for me, people who were running had these very long-winded speeches, very important speeches. Mine was easy. I said, I've been a minority for a very long time. I am really good at it. You see, they had been fighting for so long as though they were in power, because for so long they had been in power, and what happens when you're used to power is you get used to power even when it disappears. But for those who've never had power, we've always had to know to look for it. We've always had to know how to scrabble for it, how to concoct it, how to make it up. And in that moment, I realized that we didn't need someone who'd been in charge. We needed someone who wanted to get to be in charge, someone who had a pathway and a vision for what needed to happen. And in that moment, when I stood to be leader and they said yes, my vision was clear, because I also know how to read numbers. And I'd read the maps, I'd read the census information that was coming into the state, and by 2011, what we knew was that Georgia was changing, that a state that had for a long time been majority white was quickly evolving, that we had a growing African American population, we had a growing Latino population, we had a growing Asian American population, we had a small but mighty Native American population, and if you aggregated those populations and put them together with the majority white population, you could create something amazing, but you had to squint to see it. But I knew how to squint. And I looked closely at those numbers and I said, in 10 years, we can come from nothing and we can have something. And so I spent the next decade building power from the tiny position of minority leader. And it's the title they give you because they like to confuse you. They give you leader to make you feel good about yourself, but they put minority in front of it so you don't forget yourself. And my job was to work with the people in power to help the folks I represented not fall too far behind, but my job was also to dream for my people and dream about what was possible, to run for office and push people to stand and lose elections but make incremental progress. And the first time we went out there, we went for 12 seats. My mission was not to win all 12, I just needed 4. But we went after 12 because if we did that much, we could get what we needed, and it worked. We were the only chamber in the South to not lose seats in that election. And we were, in fact, the only chamber in the South to never go super minority. Over and over, year after year, we did the work. It was incremental work, it was hard work, it was tough work, it was sometimes thankless work, sometimes winning just meant not losing too bad. But the reality was we were building something because we had the vision and we had to see far enough ahead that we didn't get discouraged by what was right in front of us. And in 2018, I took it a step further and I stood to run for governor of the state of Georgia. I became the first black woman in American history to receive the nomination from a major party to be the governor of a state. But spoiler alert, I didn't get it. But in that moment, when I stood for that office, I knew the odds of winning weren't great, but I knew the odds of being pushed further backwards were extraordinary if somebody didn't stand up. And so I ran for that office. In 2014, when my friend Jason Carter had run, he ran a smart race, he ran a good race, and he turned out 1.1 million Democrats. In 2018, 4 years later, I turned out 1.9 million people. We changed the composition of the electorate. We tripled Latino turnout, we tripled Asian American turnout, we increased black turnout by 40%. More black people voted for me in that election than in the history of the state of Georgia. We increased the white population's percentage voting on our side. We increased the Native American population turnout. We did all of that because we did the work of seeing people and talking to them, of telling them the story of what was possible if we worked together. And even though we didn't win, we made progress. And that progress is what matters, and that progress is why I'm here. I look around this room, and I know there's some disappointed that not every seat is filled, but I want you to look around the room and see how many seats have butts in them, how many seats are filled. Think about who's watching this and who's thinking, next time this happens, I'm going to be here. Think about, somebody doesn't agree with me, but think about who else could be here with you. We are fighting a fight that did not happen overnight, and it will not be won overnight, but it will be won because we refuse to give up. It will be won because we refuse to give in. It will be won because we are right. We are right to expect maternal health for our mothers. We are right to expect housing and clean air and clean water. We are right to think that we should not have to work in heat that kills us and be denied access to the services that we need. We are right to believe that our young should be raised up believing that anything is possible. And they should believe that they have the right to make it so. We are right to want to end the poverty and increase the prosperity. But we can't do that if we don't have a plan that is not about tomorrow or even the day after, but it's a 10-year plan and a 20-year plan, because I'm here to tell you it works. Because even though I didn't win that election in 2018, we changed the electorate of Georgia. We put more people on the rolls. 800,000 people eventually got added to the rolls, and then more, and then more, and by 2020, the state of Georgia, the deep red state of Georgia in the heart of Dixie, gave 16 electoral college votes to Joe Biden and sent not one but 2 U.S. senators. Now again, this isn't about partisanship, this is about peopleship. You see, it doesn't really matter who you elect. What I want you to understand is who did the electing. It was every community that was told they didn't have enough. There weren't enough of them to make a difference. I know here in Arizona you know something about this, because in 2020, when you all delivered the Electoral College votes of Arizona, you were referred to as something else. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are something else, and you're going to get something done if you do the work. I'm here to tell you that by ourselves, African Americans do not have the votes to win a single election. That by themselves, the Native American population cannot win a single election. That by itself, the Latino population can't win a single election. That alone, the Asian American Pacific Islander community can't win a single election. That the white folks who want what's best for America and want what's best for us, they can't do it alone. But when we come together, we can get good done, and that's the point. I came here from Georgia because Arizona matters to me, but so does Nevada, so does California. I live in the United States of America. I live in a country that deserves all of our voices. And I know that the Native voices are too often silenced, more often ignored, that it took until 1924 for Native Americans to have citizenship in the country that they belonged to long before the rest of us knew it was here. That it was this place that gave us not only the stories that we can tell, but a future we can imagine. But I want us to believe that we have the right to work together to make it so. I want the young to understand that if they will step up, they will be joined by folks who may not look like them, but who share their values and share their vision. I want all of us to understand that when we do this work together, transformation happens. I'm living proof. I ran again in 22. I didn't get the job, but that hasn't shut me up, because I'm not running to win. I'm running for change. And we run to change the world. It doesn't matter the job you have as long as you do the job you're called to do. And you were called to make change. You were called to access the resources that are pouring through this nation that you know how to spend. You were called to show up at the polls and show up at the ballot box, but also show up at those offices when they don't do the jobs they were elected to do. If 17,000 more positions were filled by Native voters, if we had candidates running in those offices and holding those positions, we could change everything. Because you're not doing this alone. You are doing this in solidarity with communities that share maybe not your history, but we all share your story. Because we've all been overlooked and undervalued. We've been discounted and discarded. We've been told to shut up and sit quietly, and we've watched them use our voices against us. I got to know OJ and Barb because in 2019, when I decided to do a documentary about voting rights, I knew it wasn't just a Georgia issue. I knew that South Dakota got mad because a few folks had the temerity to elect a U.S. senator, and they changed the rules so their voices couldn't be heard again. I know here in Arizona, they reroute your mail so often that they knew you couldn't get your votes counted, but you all fought back and you pushed back, and in 2020, you did what you needed to do, but we've got to do it again. I know we are tired. I know this is hard work. I know you've heard this speech or some variation on this theme again and again and again, but I'm here to tell you that like any good chorus, you're going to hear it again and again because it's the truth we need to know. We only lose when we stop fighting. And they win when they convince us we don't matter. We matter. If we didn't, they wouldn't pass so many laws to make sure we didn't show up. If we didn't matter, they wouldn't work so hard to tell you you were irrelevant. If we didn't matter, we wouldn't have changed history again and again and again. So I'm here to ask you to do 3 things. Number 1, I need you to do something called verify. I need us to verify that everyone we know and care about is registered to vote. They don't want to vote because they feel that it's a wasted issue. They think it's a waste of time, but what they really mean is it's a waste of hope, because the act of voting is an act of hope. When you cast a ballot, like Governor Lewis will tell you, when you cast a ballot, you are hoping that someone does what you're asking them to do. And when you live in communities that have been overlooked for so long, it's hard to have hope. Hope hurts. But you've got to find a little bit more, because I don't do hope. I do determination. Hope, like optimism and pessimism, can come and go, but determination, I decide. We can decide to be determined to change this world to be what we need it to be. But we have to make certain that we have verified that we've got the power to be involved, and that means making sure every person we know is registered to vote. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, and so it's time for you to say amen if that's what you believe. We have to verify not only that we are registered, we've got to verify that we've got a plan to vote. Because Mike Tyson told us everyone has a plan until you get hit. Well, we've got to know they're going to keep hitting us. They're going to keep coming after us, so we've got to make sure we've got a plan to vote, and we've got a plan for our victory. It's hard to want to do this when things feel so difficult. But we know that things could be worse. But if they could be worse, they could be better. Deb Haaland has shown us what it looks like when things could be better. Sharice David has shown us what it looks like when things could be better. I don't know who you all are voting for, but I look forward to Governor Peg Flanagan in Minnesota showing us what it can look like when things do get better. I know what has happened because Mary Patola has shown us what can be better when we do the work. And so we've got to do the work to make things better. We've got to verify. So I need you to find not only the folks in your family, but I need you to find 5 other people and make sure that they are verified to vote and that they have a plan to vote. Say verify. The second thing I need you to do is volunteer. Say volunteer. I know y'all are tired. I know everyone in this room volunteers every day. In fact, if they paid you to volunteer, you could all be on the other side of this resort. But the reality is we've got to volunteer in our communities until the rest of our community sees that they're worth our effort. I'm here to remind you that you are the ones who make change every single day, and that while you feel unloved and a lack of gratitude and underappreciated, we need you. We need you to volunteer your time again, to knock on those doors and make those phone calls, to reach out to the folks who aren't verified, because they need to know that you care about their vision. They need to know that you are willing to put things aside. And the way I do this work is I always begin not by saying, "Are you voting?" I ask, "How can I help?" You see, when you start with a demand, people get hostile. But when you start with a question about what they need, people soften, or at least they listen for a second longer. Too often we don't vote because we don't see what's in it for us. But we know what we don't have, and the way we've been trying to get it hasn't worked, so why don't we try something new? But I need you to do the work of volunteering, of reaching out to those communities, to those folks who told you they will never vote because they don't trust the system, they don't trust the people. Ask them if they can trust themselves just a little bit longer. If they can trust themselves to speak up for those who don't have the chance and the opportunity. If they can trust themselves to be the person who doesn't do it because they'll get something, but because they know somebody else needs something. But they need you to be the one to ask them, "How can I help?" So first you need to say verify, and then volunteer. And the third thing is I need you to be the voice. Say the voice. I'm up here talking because I have a loud mouth, but I also have a broad vision. I believe that we deserve the opportunity to thrive. I grew up in a family that my mother referred to as genteel poor. We had no money, but we watched PBS and we read books. And the reason my mom called us genteel poor and not working poor or working class was that she had aspirations for us. She said we were not going to be defined by what wasn't in our pocket. We were going to be defined by what was in our minds. We were going to be defined by the energy and the effort we were willing to put into the world. My father used to tell us no matter how little we had, there was someone with less. Your job was to serve that person. And then he got really specific. He said, look, having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. My parents raised us to be the voice. You see my little sister over there, Janine. A lot of you have met her, and if you haven't, you will. Because she's working to make sure that every single Native American gets counted in the 2030 census, because that's one of the ways we get our voices. But it won't matter what she does in 2030 if we ignore what happens in 2024. Because we saw what they were willing to do in 2020. You saw that in the midst of a pandemic, they tried to steal our voices. They tried to stop us from voting, and they tried to stop us from being counted, and you fought back and you pushed back, and it didn't work, and we can do it again. And I know that we are tired. I know that we are weary, but I also know that we are right. And we've got to tell ourselves we're right, and we've got to tell others that we're right. We can't preach to those who agree with us. We've got to talk to those who need to know us. We've got to reach beyond our borders and beyond our boundaries and share our stories. We've got to be the voice of change and the voice of the future and the voice of victory. It took 10 years from the moment I thought I could start to create change in Georgia to getting to a place where we were able to transform the outcome of a federal election, a presidential election. That's what I could do. Working with folks across the state of Georgia, imagine what you all can do. You've been here longer, you know more, and you are right. And if you are the voices that hold us accountable, if you are the voices who give victory, if you are the voices that have the vision, then together we can win. But I need you to first say verify, then volunteer, and then voice. Because if you do those things together, we will rise and we will win. Thank you so much.
There is no way I'm going to try to say anything after that. What we're going to do is she's going to take a moment, go talk to the press, and then we have a meet and greet room where we want you to all go. She'll be able to visit with you. We want to be able to have you take some photographs with her. And we got some, I'm Navy, I call it Geedunk, the t-shirts and stuff like that. So if you give us a few minutes, go ahead and relax and stuff, and then we'll have people out there to point you to where the meet and greet room's gonna be, so that you can have a picture taken with her. We have some photographs of her so she can sign them, you can take them with you, but the youth are first. So make sure that you're there first in line, because she really is here for you. All right, take a break.